Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw. So the photo number 2 that I have is Mount St. Helens. And this is a very dramatic photograph. It's in black and white. It seems like it's a scientific record in the sense that they're at the top of the right at the top of the frame, you could just see a sort of black arrow overlaid. This looks like a slide because it looks like a slide positive because the lettering's in white, and I don't know if I'm misreading this photograph, but it's in black and white. It's a photo of Mount St. Helens in the middle of insane eruption. So take it away.
Okay, sure. So, yeah, it is a technical photo. It was taken by the U.S. Geological Survey from the air probably on May the 18th, 1980, which is when that eruption started. It started about 9 in the morning, and so I suspect they got up later in the afternoon and took this photo. I don't think it's that far into the eruption.
Wow.
So it's not a huge eruption. Interestingly, say it's about a tenth as big as the 1991 Pinatubo eruption.
Oh, really?
In the Philippines. Yeah, so it's not really that big, but very close to home for us here on the west coast of North America. And also, it's in a populated region, reasonably populated, and so it had a dramatic effect on a lot of people. But what you see in the photo is this massive cloud of volcanic stuff coming out of the top of the volcano.
Yeah.
And what you actually see is tiny shards of volcanic rock. The morning this happened, I happened to be on my way from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan to Lethbridge, Alberta to visit my sister.
Oh, wow.
My wife and I were driving along, and gradually the sky kind of got dark and cloudy, and there was this yellow kind of cast to it, and there we could start to see dust coming down.
Wow.
And
how many kilometers away is that? A few hundred,
600
right?
kilometers.
600.
We were traveling from one place to another.
Wow.
But we were like 1,500 kilometers away from Mount St. Helens, so a long way. Anyway, my brother-in-law worked in a lab that had an electron microscope, and he took some pictures of this glass or this dust, and it's really just tiny shards of glass. Anyway, that's not the point. That's what you see in this picture, but what you don't see, which is more important, is that coming out along with all that volcanic ash and glass are gases.
Yeah.
Water is the most abundant of the things coming out. Carbon dioxide probably second most, and sulfur dioxide third most. And those gases are all greenhouse gases. Well, water and CO2 are. Sulfur dioxide isn't. It does something different. But they affect the climate.
Right.
The thing with water, even though that it's the most abundant thing coming out of that volcano, is that there's a lot of water in the atmosphere. So the amount that's added during a volcanic eruption like this doesn't really make any difference to the climate.
Okay.
It's tiny compared to how much water there is.
Right.
Carbon dioxide, there's still a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, so even though that's quite abundant here, it doesn't make a huge difference.
Right.
We'll come back to that in a minute. The sulfur dioxide, on the other hand, the amount emitted by an eruption like this is probably more than there is already in the atmosphere.
Oh, wow.
Right around the world. So it makes a big difference.
A huge spike.
And that's why an eruption like this one not so much, because as I said, it's a small eruption. But say Pinatubo in 1991, they can really cool the climate, and Pinatubo did it. The Earth's climate average temperature dropped by 1.5 degrees for over a year.
Okay.
Following Mount Pinatubo.
Wow.
So a volcanic eruption has a cooling effect almost immediately.
Wow.
Then there's the carbon dioxide. Even though the amount of carbon dioxide being emitted by this isn't that big compared to the reservoir of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it stays there for a long time. So eruptions like this add to the CO2 in the atmosphere, and it builds up over hundreds, thousands of years. So if we had a period when there was higher than average volcanic activity that went on for thousands of years, that would warm the climate. Although each individual eruption would cool it a little bit, but generally speaking, over a long period of time, it would warm the climate. And that kind of thing has happened in the distant past and has had some major effects on the Earth's climate.
Right.
Extinction-causing effects
Wow.
at various times in the past.
Okay.
So this is just an example of that process. The important thing is to remember, on a short term, this cools the climate.
Right.
Although Mount St. Helens was too small to do much. And it's only lasts for a few years. On a longer term, it can warm the climate as long as it carries on like that.
Right.
So,
just because we've just met, this isn't an interview as much as it is a conversation, right? So
sure.
It's more like, okay, so the reason we met was I looked around and thought, well, who are the kinds of people I'd like to talk to? I reached out, you responded, and here we are. So thank you, huge thank you for that. As it happens, you live in BC. Now, what is your what led you to being you? Like, how did you become a professor or a teacher of climate? How did you land as that, as yourself?
So yeah, I went to university. I started going to university in the early 1970s. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I went into science because I was interested in science and I was reasonably good at it. And then the first summer after my first year of university, a friend of mine managed to get me a job working in the mining industry in northern British Columbia, not mining, but actually doing mineral exploration.
Okay.
So I went out into the wilds of northern British Columbia. We flew in a float plane, flew all around the place in helicopters, got to hike through this amazing country, and I couldn't believe that they were actually paying me to do this.
Yeah.
And from that point on, I thought, wow, this is what I want to do. I want to be able to work in the field, and looking at rocks was, something I really enjoyed. And then later on, 30 years after that, I got into teaching, and I really love teaching. I think it's just an amazing thing to be able to do. I get an awful lot out of being able to transmit concepts and ideas and get people excited about the earth and about so on. So that's kind of where I went, but that was earth science. I mean, I'm a geologist. I'm not a climate scientist.
Okay.
But then about 15 years ago, I started teaching a different course than the ones I had been, and it was called environmental geology, and I had to start reading a lot about it to kind of get ahead of it. And I realized then that we're in deep shit.
Mm-hmm.
And that we need to do something about it. And so that that really changed my perspective on everything. And
wow.
I started wanting to move more into protecting the earth than exploiting the earth.
Sure. Okay.
So
I'm going to interrupt it for a second. One of the reasons why I stumbled upon your name was because of this dramatic, beautiful book cover. I wanted to burn into people's brains. What's the title of your book again?
Book is called A Brief History of the Earth's Climate.
Nice.
And there's a subtitle, Everyone's Guide to the Science of Climate Change. So it's about the natural processes of climate change that have taken place over billions, millions, tens of thousands of years. And so because we really need to understand those if we want to understand anthropogenic climate change, what we're doing to the climate.
Yeah.
And also because so many people that are skeptical about climate change, they keep saying, well, it's the sun, or it's volcanoes, or it's something else that's causing the climate change. It's not us. So it's not our problem. We don't need to do anything about it. But if you understand the natural processes of climate change, it's pretty easy to see that it's us.
Yeah.
For sure. And we have to do something to fix it.
Okay, so as we're talking, and you're opening these windows and doors, and for example, right now as you're speaking, I'm looking at this dramatic, unbelievable image of Mount St. Helens erupting, and learning really about how you communicate and address the question of teaching and sharing a bit of climate science. So with me and with the listener, I'm looking at this really dramatic image, and to me, it's so telling of the kind of who you are, what kind of person inside you is like. Well, I've realized that this is really important, and this is really valuable, and I want to connect those realizations to other people. And it's a service that you're doing, right? I talk a lot about service leadership. And so you're giving a service as a teacher to other students, but you're also giving a service as a human, as a citizen, or as a member of the community, to the people around you, to say, okay, guys, we need to, or guys, there's people where we need to do something about this. Like this is, so I find it so inspiring that that's how you spend your time. So is this your first book, or is this many other books?
It's my first sort of trade book. I've written a couple of textbooks.
Okay.
Earth science textbooks, and and they're used in various places.
Right.
But it's the first time I've done something like this.
Okay.
And it was fun. I really enjoyed doing it. A lot of work, of course, but it was such interesting stuff to do that it wasn't work.
Right.
You talk about service. Really, it's selfish. I live here. I know we've got to look after this place for me.
Sure.
But I have children. And grandchildren, and I want them to be able to live here. But of course, it's for everybody too.
Yeah.
But it's I just want to say, not just service. It's selfishness to some degree, because I want to look after this place.
Well,
and we're not.
Just to share a little bit of how we talk about service, is that service isn't customer service or that. It's more of it's basically the connection that we give to one another within a network, as a human tribe or whatever. So, in a weird way, you said you have a grandson? I do. Yeah. How old is your grandson?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. Oh my, newborns. So this is something in my training where I talk about this. I say, well, believe it or not, as a grandparent or a parent, you give a parental or a grandparental service to this newborn, so the newborn can survive. And oddly enough, that newborn is giving a newborn service right back to you, right? So that connection and energy explains how we connect with one another. And so by helping to raise or being included in your grandson's life, you're probably rediscovering the boot camp and the insanity of newborns and saying, okay, well,
not actually directly. This will be interesting to you. My son, who just had a son, lives in Quebec City.
Oh, okay.
I think you're from Montreal.
Yeah.
So, and because of COVID and because of travel, I don't want to do much traveling. I haven't met my new grandson, but
you've seen him.
Yeah. But I will. I've seen pictures. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
How about we take that as a strange segue to the next photograph?
Sure.
So is life really a gift? Really? Can you make every second count? That's the whole point of the podcast. So if you like what you've seen and you're inspired, because that really is my mission, then please give it a like, subscribe, and share.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.